From Alessio Sakara leaping onto the fence to salute the fans before the fight was even over, to a baffled Marina Rodriguez, who celebrated before it all came crashing down. Here are all the UFC fighters who learned the hard way that celebrating too early can cost them everything, starting with Alessio Sakara versus Victor Valimaki at UFC 70.
Watch for that big right hand of Legionarius.
Everything Sakara does is setting up that right hand.
UFC 70 is known as the show where Gabriel Gonzaga nearly decapitated Mirko Cro Cop with the display of one of the most brutal head kicks in the history of the mixed martial arts. On top of that, the show also saw one of the most embarrassing examples of premature celebration in the ring. Alessio, who hails from Italy, didn't take too long to make his mark on the Canadian fighter Victor Valimaki. Halfway through the first round, the Italian fighter stunned Valimaki by using his huge right hand. This caused Victor to turn away from the action. Alessio followed with a kick to the head, after which the referee, Mario Yamasaki, stepped in to bring the fight to a halt. Thinking he'd won, Sakara began to celebrate. He leapt onto the fence and saluted the audience. Unfortunately, though, it turned out that the referee hadn't called off the fight and had instead decided to call time in order to replace Victor's mouthpiece. Even though the Matrix was basically on the canvas, sure enough, as soon as the fight restarted officially, Legionarius unleashed a barrage of combinations on his opponent, and only a few seconds later, the fight was officially stopped. This incident was straight up weird. Some fans think that Sakara just stopped thinking straight and assaulted Victor after the bout had been stopped, which obviously would have been far, far worse. As it was, though, Alessio didn't really assault him, and all it was just a funny premature celebration and a pretty epic refereeing blunder on Mario's end. Speaking of referee blunders, let's not forget Marina Rodriguez versus Amanda Ribas at UFC 257.
Yeah, and they want her to take half guard. They don't want her to just sit in the guard this time if she gets it down to the ground.
She really did not make an attempt to pass.
Marina, who was a strawweight prospect at the time, was paired up with Ribas at this show. It was hard for fans to not get excited. The two fighters had a combined record in the octagon of 6-1-2, and it looked like whoever won this bout would go on to win a title. Oh boy, did this fight live up to the expectations. It was one of the most memorable fights in 2021's biggest mixed martial arts event, but it also featured an early celebration due to a dumb refereeing mistake from Herb Dean. Amanda's ground game was phenomenal in the first round, and it was pretty clear that Marina was struggling with it. She pulled herself together by the second round and came at Ribas with a ton of aggressive combos and moves. Just moments into the round, she dropped Amanda with a powerful right hand. Amanda went down face first, and Rodriguez followed up by throwing punches. Right then, it seemed like Herb touched her on the back, which usually means that the fight is over. Assuming just that, Marina walked away, celebrating what was supposed to be a huge victory. Surprisingly, though, the referee hadn't meant to stop the fight at all, and an unsteady Ribas was allowed to stand up. This left Marina baffled, but her confusion quickly turned to anger when the fighter realized the bout wasn't over. She wasted little time after that and came towards Amanda with a bunch of heavy strikes. Dean ultimately called the fight off, and the Brazilian fighter won. No one really knows why Herb decided to touch the fighters if he hadn't meant to stop the fight, but luckily in Marina's case, her premature celebration didn't hurt her chances of winning. She even earned a $50,000 US bonus for her exceptional performance at that fight. That's incredible. A UFC fighter celebrating prematurely is actually a rare sight, believe it or not.
Siente excelente y una posición muy cómoda. Marina Rodríguez cierra la guardia, se amarra un poco. Vamos a ver, a lo mejor en las artes marciales mixtas no es lo más recomendable.
So you'll be surprised to know that there's a fighter who managed to do it not once, but twice in the same fight. Yep, I'm talking about Sean O'Malley versus Thomas Almeida, UFC 260.
Yeah, that was nice. Nemiroff, bold character since 1872. Nice entry there.
The bantamweight prospects fight with Thomas Almeida was an amusing one, to say the least. Known for his trademark flashy striking skills, O'Malley was always one step ahead of his Brazilian opponent from the start. He threw a nasty left-hand strike that sent Almeida crashing into the fence in the very first round. And Sugar was so convinced that he'd won that he simply decided to walk away. Unluckily for him, his Mark Hunt impression didn't work on the referee, who decided that Tominas wasn't quite done. This forced Sean to continue his assault, and the fight ended up going into the second round. To everyone's surprise, Thomas survived this round too, even though he took a lot of damage, and I mean a lot. In the third round, O'Malley dropped the Brazilian fighter with yet another left hand, and this time it seemed like it was finally over. Tominas rolled onto his back on the canvas, and it was obvious that he was in a lot of pain. But, just like last time, the referee Mark Smith decided that he hadn't had enough. This time, Sugar didn't give Almeida the chance to recover at all. He knocked him out cold with his right-hand strikes, which finally forced the referee to stop the game. This was a huge win for the bantamweight prospect, even if he celebrated early twice during the fight.
That he's throwing at him, trying to set him up. O'Malley.
He's a hard guy to figure out. Like, look at that.
Oh, I think that kick might have hurt him a little bit.
But honestly, at least it wasn't as bad as Rousimar Palhares versus Dan Miller at UFC 134.
Going right away every time.
As Jake Shields found out how to beat.
The former middleweight and welterweight contender Palhares was pretty well known for his eccentric nature, and unluckily for him, this is what ultimately led to his release from the UFC. His career at the UFC was marked by several bizarre incidents. The Brazilian fighter became infamous for holding on to submissions for way longer than necessary. However, that's not the only strange thing Toquinho became famous for during his time at the promotion. He was also well known for being responsible for one of the wildest premature celebrations in the history of mixed martial arts. UFC 134 took place in Rousimar's native land, Brazil, and it was the first event of its kind in well over a decade. It was obvious it was going to be an emotional one for him. The bout started with Toquinho coming at Dan with a front kick, which took the fight to the canvas. He dropped Dan with a kick to the head late in the first round, after which the remarkable fighter followed up with a flurry of strikes and punches. But soon after, his emotions got the best of him. Before the ref could even consider stepping in, Rousimar had ran off to celebrate on top of the cage, which forced the officials to call him back down. This ended up being a moment of pure confusion for everyone involved. Unfortunately, Toquinho's early celebration gave Dan a chance to recover, and when the Brazilian native closed in on him once more, the New York-based fighter threw a combination that nearly leveled Rousimar. This sent the crowd into shock. Luckily, Palhares managed to recover from the barrage of strikes and went on to dominate Dan for the rest of the fight. He ended up winning the fight, but once it was over, the premature celebration was all anyone could remember about it, and it would stand as a reminder of Rousimar's wild nature for the rest of his days in the UFC. Anyway, that's everything about the UFC fighters that celebrated too early.